It's the middle of the afternoon in the Kalahari Desert, and a man is lying in the shade doing absolutely nothing. No boss is coming, no shift is starting in 10 minutes, he's not on a break. This is just his day. For most of the 20th century, anthropologists assumed this was impossible. The story we told ourselves went like this. Before farming, before cities, life was a brutal, non-stop scramble for food. Every waking hour was spent hunting, gathering, surviving. Nasty, brutish, and short, as the old line goes. Then, in 1966, an anthropologist named Richard Lee actually timed it. He followed the Jew-Honsi people of the Kalahari, modern hunter-gatherers, one of the closest living windows we have into how humans lived for the vast majority of our existence, and tracked exactly how many hours they spent finding food. The number he came back with? 12 to 19 hours a week, less than a part-time job. By 1972, another anthropologist, Marshall Solins, ran with that number and coined a phrase that's still quoted today, the original affluent society. His argument, hunter-gatherers weren't poor and desperate. They were, in a sense, the most leisurely people who ever lived. It's a great story. You'll still see it repeated everywhere. Memes, TED Talks, productivity podcasts telling you cavemen worked less than you do. Here's the catch. It's not exactly true. And what the real data actually shows is stranger and more useful than the myth. Start with the number itself. Lee's 12 to 19 hours figure only counted one specific activity, time spent out in the bush actively searching for and catching food. It didn't count what happened after, processing that food, making and repairing tools, hauling water, collecting firewood, watching children. Other researchers noticed the gap almost immediately. Kristen Hawkes and James O'Connell, working with the Aceh people of Paraguay, found their subjects working closer to 70 hours a week once you counted everything. Lee himself went back and recalculated. In his 1984 book, the number for the Jew-Honsi jumped to roughly 40 to 44 hours a week. A standard work week, just organized completely differently. No clock, no boss, no fixed shift. You work when the tubers are ready, when the animal is nearby, when the water hole needs a supply run. So if cavemen only worked a few hours isn't quite right, what did fill the rest of an ancient human's day? This is where it gets specific. In 2015, sleep scientist Jerome Siegel strapped actigraph wristbands, the same tech in a modern fitness tracker, onto 94 people across 3 still-living pre-industrial groups, the Hadza of Tanzania, the San of Namibia, and the Chimane of Bolivia. Over 1,165 recorded nights, a pattern emerged that broke the other assumption people had, that pre-electric humans slept long, deep, dusk-to-dawn nights. They didn't. Average sleep 5.7 to 7.1 hours, and none of them fell asleep at dark. Every group stayed up, on average, about 3 hours and 20 minutes after sunset, talking, doing camp tasks, before drifting off. And they didn't wake with the sun. They woke at the coldest point of the night, hours before dawn, as if the drop in temperature itself were the alarm. Then there's what happened around the fire during those extra dark hours. Anthropologist Polly Wiesner spent decades with the Jew-Honsi and in 2014 published an analysis of 174 recorded conversations and 68 firelit stories. During the day, talk was practical and a little sharp. 34% of it was gossip and complaints. 31% was about food and resources. At night, around the fire, the entire content of the conversation flipped. Gossip dropped to 7%. Storytelling, folk tales, accounts of distant relatives, memories, jumped to 81%. Picture it directly. The sun is down. You're sitting close to a small fire, the only light for miles in every direction, total desert dark past its edge. Around you, people of every age, mixed together, no separate kids' table.
Someone starts telling a story about a relative who lives 100, maybe 120 miles away. Someone you might see once every year or two, if that. And through the story, that person stays real to you, present, even from that distance. This isn't idle chatter. Some researchers think this nightly ritual, made possible only once humans controlled fire and could push activity past sunset, is a candidate origin point for something huge: humanity's unusual habit of maintaining rich social bonds with people who are far away, or even gone. Storytelling, running on firelight as one of the engines of cumulative culture itself. Meanwhile, during the actual daylight hours, not everyone in camp is foraging. Here's a specific measured detail. Researchers tracking Hadza children found that a toddler's weight gain tracked closely with how much food its mother brought in until she had a new baby to nurse. At that exact point, the older child's growth started tracking a different woman's foraging effort instead, its grandmother's. Watch what that grandmother is actually doing. She's digging up tubers, tough, fibrous root vegetables a toddler's hands and teeth can't process alone, and handing them over. Not a symbolic role, a direct, physical, daily act of labor that a young child's growth chart depended on. It's one of the leading explanations anthropologists now have for why human women, almost alone among primates, live decades past the point they can have children. Not decline, a job. And once the tubers are dug, the fire's going, the stories are told, there's still time left over. In April 2026, archaeologist Robert Madden published something that pushes leisure back further than almost anyone expected: bone dice, found across 57 sites in Wyoming, Colorado, and New Mexico, back roughly 12,000 years. Someone sat down with a piece of bone, worked it smooth by hand, and carved a mark into one face, deliberately biasing which way it would land. Not a tool, not a weapon, a rigged game. That's 6,000 years older than the dice found in Mesopotamia and Egypt, evidence of organized play on the ragged edge of the last ice age, among people who were still fully mobile, carrying everything they owned. Now, you might be thinking, this all sounds a little too cozy. Isn't this just cherry-picking the nice parts? Fair pushback. These aren't literal snapshots of Paleolithic life. They're modern people living today, often on marginal land, sometimes with real contact with markets and governments. Anthropologists use them as the best available analog, not a time machine. And the hunter-gatherers had it easy thesis itself is genuinely disputed. Some researchers argue the original leisure numbers were built on too thin a sample, and that real inequality, by age and by sex, existed inside these egalitarian bands.
So which is it? Brutal grind or leisurely paradise? Neither cleanly. The actual data suggest forager labor, once you count everything, adds up to something close to a modern work week in raw hours. But it was organized around what the day and the season actually demanded, not around a clock. And the specific hours that weren't spent working weren't wasted either. They were sleep that ran shorter and later than we assume, tuber-digging grandmothers keeping a second generation alive, firelit stories keeping distant relatives present in memory, and a rigged bone die passed between strangers to give a game some stakes. The 20-hour work week was never quite real, but the shape of a day that made room for story, for play, for a grandmother's labor to count as much as a hunter's, that part holds up. And it's a shape we're still, in our own way, trying to get back to.